Okay. Okay. Hi. I was told to speak in English, so I hope that's okay. Feel free to ask questions in Hebrew, and stop me if I'm speaking too quickly, because I tend to do that. So my name is Miriam Schwab, and I got involved in the world of WordPress about 12 years ago when I started to teach myself to build websites, and I was looking for a solution for my clients that that enabled them to be able to manage their content and not bother me and make me crazy. You know, change this word, add this period and comma, and it was just really annoying. So I tested a bunch of platforms, Joomla, Drupal, and WordPress, and then I kind of fell in love with WordPress and started to offer it as a business solution to companies and organizations here in Israel. I think I was one of the first to do that, and eventually that grew into a company called Illuminea based out of Yerushalayim, and we're working with leading tech companies, organizations, universities, etc., in Israel, building custom WordPress solutions. When I started on my journey, I started writing a blog called WP Garage. Fortunately, and me and Rebecca, my coworker, who's been working with me also for like 12 years, we wrote posts quite frequently. Unfortunately, we haven't done that in a long time, but people still come and find our content there when they're looking for tutorials about how to do things. I organized the WordCamp conference 5 times in Israel. WordCamp, there's something called WordCamp Central, and they kind of manage WordCamp conferences around the world in different cities. And I organized it 5 times. And then they implemented a rule that you can't organize it more than twice. So they wanted to give other people opportunity to organize it, which makes sense. So I stopped, and thankfully Press for Word jumped in, because nobody else really kind of took up the WordCamp thing. But it was fun and nice. I don't know if any of you were there, but they were good conferences. And about 2 years ago, I started working on a concept, which then turned into a startup called Strattic. That's where most of my focus is now. Strattic publishes dynamic websites like WordPress as static versions of themselves. So they act exactly the same, but there's no underlying database. And what that means is that the security issues that we all suffer from, I'm guessing most of you have a site that was hacked at some point, are no longer relevant, and the sites load much faster. So that's just a bit about me. So today we're going to talk about making websites fast. This is a quote that I really liked. We've made the web in our image obese. That's more for America. Israel is not quite there yet. But the size of web pages has increased tremendously over the last, I just did an analysis of from 2014 to 2018. And you can see that the size of web pages on desktop and on mobile has increased on desktop by 51% and on mobile by 161%. It's crazy. And the number of resources that are requested on every page load, on average, 8% more on desktop, 60% more on mobile. We're definitely trying to get our mobile websites to do maybe more than they should. The speed index, so the time it takes to load the pages until completion, on desktop has actually gone down a bit, which I think we've learned more or less, or at least the browsers and the servers have learned how to deliver desktop content in a better way. But on mobile, it's just getting slower and slower. And Google, first in 2010, spoke about how speed is going to be a ranking factor, meaning when Google decides whether a site should appear and where, it's taking into consideration a lot of different parts, right? A lot of different components and details. And one of them they started to talk about would be speed in 2010, and now they made it very concrete. They said page speed for mobile ranking is going to become a ranking factor in July 2018, which is next month. And everyone had better get their act together and make their sites faster. To the point where Google now is cooperating with WordPress. I don't know if you guys know this, but this is really interesting. Google also is aware that WordPress powers 30% of the internet. There's no other single platform that takes up so much of the internet. And with 30% of the internet running on WordPress and the problems that it faces or encounters, Google wants the internet to be a better place and is now cooperating directly with the WordPress project and is putting engineers on it in order to make it faster and better, which is good and also a little bit scary in some ways. But you can understand the interest that Google has in making the internet faster when they get directly involved in WordPress. So why is speed important? You guys probably have experienced it yourself, but 25% of site visitors will abandon a site if it takes more than 4 seconds to load. A 1 second delay in page load speed will reduce customer satisfaction, cause a dip in page views, lead to a dip in conversion rates. And in general, slow sites are bad for business and the internet. By the way, this is not the font that I used. I used a really nice font called Montserrat. I don't know if you know it, but it's really beautiful, so I'm sorry for myself. Okay, so if you have a website and you want to know how it's doing in terms of speed, you can't always tell, on your own. You can't just open it in a browser and be like, well, that loaded fast for me, because if you've loaded your site before, your browser's caching parts of it, right? So there's a bunch of tests that you can use, tools that you can use to test your speed. Pingdom is one. You guys probably know it. GTmetrix is another. And then, of course, there's Google's Page Speed Insights. Now, I have like a hate-love relationship with Page Speed Insights, more hate than love. I feel like it just makes everyone sad. Like, you run your site through it, and it's like F, and you need to defer all your JavaScript and combine it. Good luck. Oh, thank you so much, Google, for that. That's really so helpful. So I'm just putting it here because it exists, and I'm going to talk about something that it does do that's useful. But these two tools are really useful because they have the waterfall reporting, so you can really see things. And I'm going to show you an interesting example of something that it picked up that's very simple. Anyways, the bottom line is performance should be part of design. When we, in my web agency, or you guys, if you are an agency or a supplier of WordPress services, I think, and Google thinks, and the internet thinks, that performance needs to be part of how we design or build a website. In the end, if a site is gorgeous, whatever, if it takes 5 or more seconds to load, nobody's going to experience that beauty, and they're going to leave. All right, so we're going to go through some ways that you can speed up your site. So first of all, we're going to talk about themes. So in Illumina, my web development agency, for many years, we worked off of existing themes, like commercial themes, things like that. And then we stopped because we really hated them. And the reason that we hated them is because a lot of them are just bloated with code, because they sell it to us by saying, this theme can do 1,000 things. Now, when you or I download it and use it, we're using maybe 5% of that. And so the other 95% of the code for those 1,000 things is still there. Also prone to bugs and things like that. So the theme that you use makes a big impact on the site that you build. We ended up building our own framework and building off of that because it was more efficient. How can you tell if a theme is an efficient one to use? So first of all, read reviews on the theme, whatever, pages. And also, you can even do your own testing. Download and install it. A lot of them have dummy content that you can import it, and then do speed tests and compare. You can probably find a theme that works efficiently that you like, and then you can maybe possibly repeatedly use it for your clients. The themes on the WordPress repository tend to be a little bit better than the commercial ones because they're not trying to stuff them with 1,000 options. This is a plugin that you can install called Query Monitor, and it will tell you how many queries are taking place to the database on every page load. That is something that's very, very impactful on how slow your site loads. It can be very useful for you. This is a kind of reporting that it does by components, etc. So if you do download a theme to test it, you can download and install this plugin as well and see what it's reporting to you. So yeah, so the theme directory is a good place to go for relatively clean and efficient themes. Plugins. This is actually one of our sites, as in, I probably shouldn't tell you that, but if you take a look over here, you will see that this site has 44 plugins installed and 36 of them are active. So bad. So bad. Do not do that. It's every extra piece of code, every extra component that's running, and some of them run on every page, even if it's not necessary, can slow down your site. So take a look at your plugins, take the time to do it, and go through it. Do I need this? Is this still being used? Am I doubling up? Sometimes when a site's getting old, you'll end up installing 2 plugins that do the same thing. Delete them. See if there's places where you can just add a function, the functions.php or something like that, and get rid of a plugin and be done with that. So audit your plugins, see if you can replace any with more efficient code. This is a plugin that was developed by GoDaddy, but you can see it was last updated 3 years ago, which is a bad sign in general when you're downloading and installing plugins, you should take a look at that. I don't know why they stopped supporting it, but it was useful in that it gave you easy to read and easy to understand reports on what the plugins on your site are doing. Okay, so it still works, but it's just not supported. So if you do use it, maybe install and then remove it, because it might have security issues. Images. Okay, so actually images are probably the biggest change that you can make to your site that will have the biggest impact. Something like 66% of the weight of pages today are images. Here's just some stats also from 2014 till now. The size of images on a page has gone up 189% on mobile, 45% on desktop. So these are the changes you can see. And when users actually optimize their images, they can save on desktop a lot more actually than on mobile. I think there's still a long way to go with that. And also probably we should be using less images and also using images like SVG format more than JPEG and the other ones. In any case, this is a report that I ran on Pingdom for a site. And you can see that this site, 97.3% of its weight was images. Now, it wasn't like a photo gallery site or something. It's just a regular, what we call an atar tadmit. It was just a commercial site. But the user had uploaded an image that, like a stock photo, in its full resolution. And so that one image was weighing down the site so much, it was taking, I don't know, like 7 seconds to load, and they didn't know why. They couldn't identify it. So I ran the site through Pingdom, and right away I could see that the request by content type image 51%, and the images were 97% of the page load. So, and then the report also down, I don't show it here, shows the images that are on the page and their weight. So I immediately could identify that this image was something like 8 megabytes, and it can be optimized. This is an interesting tool that analyzes any page and tells you how the images are affecting it. It's actually really useful. I don't show an output here, but you could test it and see. It's a really easy way to also get a picture of how the pictures are doing on your site. Now, I know I said that I'm not a fan of Google PageSpeed Insights because it makes me sad, but they have this interesting and useful feature where they run a scan of your page, they identify the images, and then in this teeny tiny, does this have like a thingy? Let's see. No. Oh, it's so fuzzy. At the bottom here, where I put the red, it says download optimized images. So it finds the images on your site, and then it optimizes them using an Apache library, whatever. And then you can just download them and replace the original images with these optimized images. So they do the work for you, but they talk about bad user experience. I mean, how are you supposed to spot that? You have this whole list of images and it's just yet another thing, and it's like, that's the jackpot. So anyways, I had never really noticed it, and so that might be useful to you guys because it does the work for you. Google does, in their developer handbook or whatever they call it, have image optimization tips. They also talk about using SVG and using vector instead and things like that. Removing necessary image metadata, and I'm going to talk about that. So there are some plugins that you can install on your site that will do that. Coming back to the plugin thing, I would say maybe avoid that if you can, because then it means that you have something else running on your site, using server resources and communicating, let's say, through an API with something else, and it's just another thing. But on the other hand, if you don't want to spend the time, or you have a team of people and you want to make sure that every image that they're uploading is optimized, then if you install one of these plugins, it will make sure that that's happening for you. Short Pixel seems to be the favorite these days. It's a pretty good tool. There's some third-party tools if you don't want to install a plugin. So Image Optim has a Mac kind of app that you can download, but they also have a web service. And one of the things that Google mentioned was removing metadata from your images. So whenever you take a picture, particularly let's say on your smartphone, it adds all sorts of metadata, like what's it called? Shutter speed and the date and the location. It has geolocation, which is a little bit too much information. And in any case, that adds weight to your images. So you could scrub them, and in any case, it's probably a good idea to scrub them before you upload them, so people don't have that type of identifying information. So these are third-party tools that you can use. Jetpack, the automatic plugin, which has a lot of things going on with it, does have an image CDN. So what that does is you don't have to change anything. You just install the plugin and use it. It will upload your photos and any media like that to their CDN. So it means that those assets on your site will load faster in other places in the world. It doesn't optimize them, but it does make sure that they're being served from other places. And also, because it's pulling it from a different location, not just from your domain name, there could be a speed impact to that. But we're going to talk about something that means that it's not necessarily the case. But just so you know, there is an image CDN that you can easily implement directly on your site. Hosting. Aside from the images, I would say hosting plays probably the second largest role in how fast your site loads. We've seen that repeatedly with clients in my web agency, where they were on some kind of crappy shared hosting. I won't mention any names, GoDaddy, Bluehost. And then we moved them to a much better server, a higher quality server, and then the sites just loaded much faster without even changing any code. So Google themselves say, try to keep server response time below 200 milliseconds. That doesn't mean page load time. Of course, they would be very happy if that was page load time, right? They mean the time to first response, time to first byte. So when you first load a site, it has to communicate with the server and get the initial information, and that's the TTFB count. And they mean that that should be less than 200 milliseconds. In regular hosting, your site sits physically on one server somewhere. And then anyone who wants to access it has to then communicate with that server in its geographical location. And distance actually matters on the internet. So what a CDN does is it replicates your site in multiple locations. And then when someone in Australia wants to see your site, they access the Australian version. And when someone in Europe, Eastern Europe, wants to access it, they'll get the Eastern European version, etc., like that. So a CDN in general can speed up your site. With a dynamic website like a WordPress site, meaning that the pages query the database and then import the content from there and then display it to the user, you can't serve up the HTML pages through a CDN, but you can serve up your static assets. So that would be your CSS, your JavaScript, images, video, and anything like that. So like good hosting with a CDN, or even actually bad hosting with a CDN, but better but good hosting, then you may see significant increases in your speed. Caching. So caching essentially creates static versions of pages. And then that way, when those pages are served up, they don't have to query the database. And they're just there. They're pre-rendered. And there's a bunch of tools that do that or help you do that. W3 Total Cache was like the leading one, I would say, for a long time. WP Rocket came into play in more recent years. It's a premium plugin. Make sure that if you're using any of these plugins, they don't conflict with caching on your server. There's a lot of hosting providers that do caching for you on the server level. And then double caching doesn't help and can even hurt. And don't over cache or under cache. And that's the really tricky thing with caching. You can either end up over caching so that pages that need to update don't end up updating or not frequently enough or not fast enough. And under caching means you're not getting the benefits of caching. It's a tricky thing. If you go into a plugin like W3 Total Cache, you'll see like 1,000 options. And they have the option to integrate with CDNs and things like that. So it's a bit tricky, but it can help. And header cache controls for browsers to say this static asset doesn't need to be updated for a long time, so just store it here. So the next time someone visits your site, it can be faster. So gzip. Gzip is a form of compression for your files. It can compress files for up to 70%, up to 70% for much faster delivery. So imagine a file that's 100 kilobytes and then it's 30 kilobytes or whatever it is, 30 to 70% less. Of course, it's going to be delivered faster. And then if it's applied overall, then the results can be significant. It's a file format. And basically, it's a page header that tells the browser, this site or these assets are available in the gzip format. Download that. Don't download the full version. Don't compress already compressed files. So some images, some types of files are already compressed. And if you then compress on top of the compression, you actually will end up hurting your site. So first of all, does your server offer gzip compression? This is one tool that makes it really easy to tell. It's called checkgzipcompression.com. You just enter in your URL, and it will tell you if you are blessed or cursed. And so in our case, we're blessed, yay. So, and it tells you 70% was saved by compressing this page with gzip. And it tells you the difference between the size of the page before gzip and after. You can see it's very significant. You can also see if files are being gzipped in the developer tools in Chrome in the console. You go to not elements or console, no, network, sorry. You go to network, you do the larger view, which is, there's like an icon here with like a bunch of lines. And then you can see the before and after size of files and what's being gzipped. If you're not, if your site's not being gzipped, contact your hosting provider. You can implement gzip in htaccess, but better that it's probably done on the server level. So your hosting provider should be doing that for you. HTTP 2. So HTTP we know as what we put in the URLs, and it's the protocol that helps us view and deliver websites to each other. It was like developed, I don't know, 25 years ago or something by Tim Berners-Lee and wasn't updated for a very long time. And then a bunch of people were like, we need to update this. It's inefficient. The size of web pages are growing. What we expect the web pages to do is becoming more complex. We need a way to make this better. Better for developers and better for delivery. So they came up with a new protocol called HTTP 2. And it's a major revision of the web's protocol. HTTP 1, which was the version that we were using until now, only allowed one request per TCP connection. And then something like a CDN where you loaded assets from another domain was being used in order to try to overcome that, because that you could only do it from one domain with one connection, and then if you had in multiple places, then it theoretically sped things up. Developers started using things like sprites. I don't know if any of you guys have used them. I hated them when we started using them, but it made things faster. But like go change your sprite after, horrible. Inlining, which is just bad. It's bad form. It's bad if you want to add another form of security called content security policies, which I'm talking about next week at your WordCamp Europe, if any of you are going to be there. But content security policies depend on files being external. You know, concatenation. Like it was basically developers were hacking the internet to make it work. And so this working group was formed to develop HTTP 2. So now you can use one connection for parallel. You can use header compression. It allows servers to push responses. Now, in order to use HTTP 2, you must use SSL on your site. And while in the beginning, when people start talking about implementing SSL on their sites, people go, well, it slows things down because there's this initial handshake thing that happens that slows things down. Now it actually speeds things up, and I'm going to show you a really cool comparison. Okay, but first, test if your site supports HTTP 2. If you don't have SSL, you really, really need to do it. Google has also been talking about that, and it's better for everybody, so just do it. And then you can hopefully benefit from HTTP 2 if your hosting provider offers it. You can check if they offer it by using a tool like this one. Now this is a really cool test. So this test, see all these green check marks? When you load this page, it loads all these green check marks, which are each individual images. So first you do HTTP HTTP versus HTTPS, I think that's the URL, test or something, .com, and then it starts to load it over HTTP. So when you load this page over HTTP, it's not using HTTP 2, and so it takes like ridiculous amount of time. I mean, it depends where you are or whatever, but it's a lot. It's really long. Then, wait, 173.328 seconds? Okay, sorry, this is not right. 2012, I did 2 different tests. Anyways, the point is, if you go to this page, the HTTPS or the HTTP version of this exact page is 212% slower than the HTTPS. I might have had a problem with my internet, but you can go see it. It's very cool. It starts to load all the green check marks, and you'll see that it's much faster on HTTPS. So get HTTPS and make your site more secure and better for your users and for yourself. And then you can also benefit from HTTP 2. Then, of course, there's AMP, which Joost mentioned this morning. And he said some of you might hate it, and I am in that category. I feel like Google is encroaching on everything, like in what we do as web developers, and trying to make us work for them, which on the one hand we all want to do in a way, but on the other hand, like, can you just leave us alone, let us use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript rather than your own version? And they go, well, it's open source, and we're working with whatever. Whatever. So I'm talking about it because it does make mobile pages faster. This is the AMP project, accelerated mobile pages. There are even hints that they're like trying to get users to use it on desktop. So, and then you know, they try to get you to store it in their cache, and so your URLs change, and I don't know, whatever. That's AMP. It also limits you in design and functionality. It's getting better, but still. There is a plugin for WordPress. Basically what it does is you add AMP to the end of the URL, and then it delivers the AMP version of the site. If you have a content site that you regularly update, then you should probably implement AMP, because Google is putting only AMP sites at the top of particular results. And I'm part of a bunch of SEO forums, and I was like, okay, so what do you say? Do we really need to implement AMP? And they're all like, yeah. Like, they see differences in how their sites are ranking and the results they're getting. And you can see that the AMP for WordPress plugin is being developed by some serious heavyweights. WordPress.com VIP, which is the SaaS version of WordPress, right? That's run by Automatic. XWP, which is one of the biggest WordPress development agencies in the world. Google, who we all know, and other contributors. So that's AMP. Google created another depressing page speed testing tool for testing your mobile speed, and they, just to make us all feel really good about ourselves, tested over 3G instead of 4G. And so no matter what, your site's going to do terribly in this tool. So have fun and feel good about yourselves, but just so you know it's there. And then finally, static. So you can implement a lot of different things on your site in order to make your site faster. I went through a lot of different things, and they can make an impact. You might find just by optimizing particular images, your site speed will increase tremendously. HTTP2, you should be doing, things like that. Make sure your server's gzipped and all that. I started working on Strattic because I started thinking about how all of this, the underlying functionality of the WordPress sites that we're managing, which is database driven, that's what's slowing down our sites and causing security issues. Most of the hacks to the sites that we are running are through the database, and the page load speed, like no matter what you do, you can hack away at it. We had clients who would come to us and say, please just increase the speed of our site. And we're a very talented team, I would say, and we would invest many hours and maybe shave a second off the page load speed. So the idea behind Strattic is that we publish the website as a static version of itself. So what does that mean? People sometimes think, what is dynamic versus static? So static doesn't mean that if you have some kind of JavaScript functionality or gallery or video, that's going to stop working. In this case, static means that the pages are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and that's it. It's not querying the database for any information, for any content. They're pre-rendered. It's like the ultimate cache. You can't possibly under-cache or over-cache with this type of tool. And so I mentioned checking the database queries on a theme. Even if you're using the worst, heaviest, most inefficient theme, and it's querying, I don't know, hundreds of times on every page load, once it's been rendered with our tool Strattic, then that is no longer an issue because it only delivers the output of that. So all of that heaviness of the processing happened before, and then we just take the front end and we deliver it. Everything is pre-rendered. We put a CDN for everything. So I mentioned that right now with a dynamic website like WordPress, you can only put your static assets on a CDN, not the actual pages, and the actual pages are kind of what matter the most. So once it's all static, you can put every single page, your about page, your team page, your blog post, your everything, all on the CDN and deliver through there for fast speeds everywhere. Of course, it's gzipped. Of course, it's HTTPS for everybody, SSL certificates on all the sites. No question, it must be done. And no mixed content. When you implement HTTPS, you may find that you don't get the green padlock because something is still being loaded through HTTP, not through HTTPS, and then you don't get it's not fully SSL, it's not fully HTTPS. So we implement something with content security policies, which I mentioned before, for every site so that there is no mixed content, fully green, padlocked, fully secure from that point of view. HTTP2, of course. And so that's our new approach to the web. Thanks. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Yeah. What am I looking at? Elementor, yeah. So Elementor is a plugin that creates output, and so it's totally compatible. in general. So page builders are the worst. Okay, I should have had a number that said don't use some of the page builders, but Elementor is actually really good at being efficient. Like Visual Composer and those ones, horrible. Elementor is very good. So and especially now with Gutenberg coming along, that's going to be very efficient in terms of page builders because it's going to be native to the core and it's being built really well. So that's another way that you can use a page builder functionality. But Elementor is very good. And I was always against page builders with every bone in my body. Yeah. HTTP2 is the host responsibility. So once your site is HTTPS, then you can run it through that tool and see if it has HTTP2. And if it doesn't, then contact your host and say, I want HTTP2. Yeah. So generally look in the managed hosting category. Whatever hosting providers are there, they generally are pretty good about making sure that they're supporting the technologies that they should support. You could talk to me after. Any other questions? Yeah. Okay, so first of all, if you're using WP Rocket, probably not all of your files are cached. Maybe they are. I don't know. Okay, so when we've done speed comparisons, Strattic will still be faster. First of all, you get the CDN, out of the box, which you don't have to implement, okay? Security is another issue. When you're running WP Rocket, the database is still there and it's still exposed. You always have the underlying database and you have the underlying server. So your static files that are cached, generated by the caching, still depend on the speed of your processing server, right? You're running on a LAMP server of some kind. That LAMP server will always be slower than a static server like S3 plus the CDN that we're running off of. I promise you that. It will always be slower, especially if you're using any kind of shared hosting of any kind. It means that if you are not bad, but some other site there is slower, then everyone gets slower. So yeah, so that's where it's faster. Any other questions? Nope. All right. Thank you. Good luck, and have a good day.